You are listening to the Music Ed Mentor podcast, where we help music educators to build, manage, and grow thriving school music programs and have long and happy careers. I am your host, Elisa Jansen-Jones, and I am absolutely honored that you are spending this time with me today. I know how valuable every minute is, and I assure you this episode will be worth every one. My guest today is Ingrid Martin, a thought leader from Australia who has created an entire online course to teach conducting. It's true, but also one for how to teach ensembles online and a companion ebook full of activities for your ensemble that you can do both hybrid or entirely online. She's the real deal, someone who embraced the opportunities that teaching online gave her ensembles to differentiate their learning, and at the same time, to rethink the how, the what, and the why of ensemble performance in our profession. In this episode, we'll talk about how she pivoted her ensembles, what activities she discovered that can work best no matter what your teaching situation is, and how you too can continue to build stronger and lasting relationships with your students, even if you aren't seeing them in a traditional rehearsal setting. But first, a big shout out to the software leader in music education. Not just now, while so many of us are limited to teaching online, but for supplemental practice and learning for your students when we're all back to in-person rehearsals again. It's Smart Music. With the largest library of repertoire, including almost the entire collected works of Randall Standridge, Smart Music is your go-to tool for engaging your students inside and outside of the classroom. Now, without further ado, let's glean some great knowledge from the experience, talent, and mind of Ingrid Martin.
Hi, everyone. My name's Ingrid Martin, and I'm a conductor and music teacher from Melbourne, Australia. And I work in schools, in the community, and with amateur and professional ensembles. And I'm really excited to be here on the podcast today.
And we are thrilled to have you. So you say you've conducted with several different types of ensembles. Can you just give us an idea of your full sort of range of background of conducting ensembles?
So I got interested in conducting at the end of high school, and I actually did not pursue music in my formal training as the first thing out of high school. I went and did a medical degree and continued playing my French horn and trumpet and trombone and other various things throughout college, as well as dipping my hand into the world of conducting. And that was really where I got my start working with student community ensembles with university level students. And then that progressed into working in high schools and middle schools and taking on more community groups, everything from tiny like regional concert bands with only 9 students in them to big community full symphony orchestras.
So a pretty diverse background in conducting. And when did you first start creating learning opportunities online?
So I guess one thing that I realized as someone in Australia, we have a quite different music education landscape, particularly at the tertiary college level than, say, in the United States. And I came to the United States in 2012 to do my master's degree in conducting at the University of Minnesota. And that got me really interested in, first of all, entrepreneurship. So ways that we can create opportunities for ourselves. And probably at that stage, the kernel of this idea of creating resources for other conductors was born, although I didn't know really what it was at the time. And in the sort of 8 years since, it's gradually turned into what is now Conducting Artistry, which is a website with online resources, a podcast of my own, and video courses for conductors, because I realized that unless you're formally pursuing some kind of a graduate degree, which is obviously very time and labor intensive, even if you're doing a degree for, say, over summer intensive subjects, it's a big ongoing time commitment that's probably going to disrupt your life. You might have to move somewhere, like across the country, or like I did, across the other side of the world. And aside from making those kind of really big commitments to improving your conducting, and the other end of the spectrum, maybe going and doing a weekend workshop or a 1 week symposium, there's not really much around for people to continue learning and improving their conducting technique sort of throughout the school year, that you can do in an ongoing way and on your own time schedule in a way that's convenient to you. So I wanted to create something that would help people continue to work on their conducting in their own time and keep improving and getting better, so that their students can improve and get better.
So you discovered the magic that is online learning for creating accessible experiences. Before,
Yeah,
the entire world had to, shut down and figure it out on their own, right?
Yeah, the timing was quite interesting. So I launched Conducting Artistry in December 2019, and little did I know what was about to come around the corner in 2020. That gave me a great starting point for providing these resources and giving people information, although I, of course, was not giving them exactly the information that I had planned or expected, as our lives as conductors completely changed in 2020. And what we were doing and what was my sort of main area of expertise and knowledge that I wanted to share with people suddenly wasn't quite relevant in the same way when people were suddenly teaching online instead of standing on a podium in their ensemble room.
So how have you adapted rehearsal strategies into online?
So in Melbourne, Australia, we've had one of the harshest periods of lockdown during 2020. We went into lockdown in the middle of March, and we came out briefly in around June and July, and our schools went back to a little bit of in-person learning. And then we were basically shut down again from July to October, and schools gradually moved to be back to fully in person by the end of our school year, sort of November, December. And what that meant was, like everybody, things were changing from day to day, from minute to minute, about whether we were in person or we were online or we were hybrid. So the first thing I realized in that crazy period of 2020 and moving to online learning was the need to be flexible and to create an approach that was going to work, whether we suddenly ended up being back in person the following week with not much notice, or if we were in person and we were suddenly sent back into a lockdown again with very little notice. So flexibility was a core element of my approach, but probably the most fundamental thing that I realized early on was that the easiest thing to do for all of us at the beginning of this disruption was to have a knee-jerk reaction. And understandably, the whole situation was and is very threatening to us. It's not what we were trained for. It's not how we have learned to teach and lead our students. And in times of this kind of distress, it's really easy to just revert back to what we know, even when that might not be the most appropriate thing. And so what I wanted to do was think really clearly about, when we are in person and doing the things that we love in the way that we love and the way we know how, what is it for? What is it that we are trying to give our students or members in our ensemble, if it's in community setting. And for me, the things that it came down to was helping our musicians have a connection with music and helping them have a connection with each other. Because I think that's what really stands ensemble music apart from practicing self in a practice room by, someone just listening to recordings or going to a concert. It's that sense of collaboration, of working together, and the sense of having a personal, emotional connection to the music, being moved by the music in some way. And so I really tried to let those two ideas be the guiding rudder, I guess, for this journey through uncharted waters, that I passed everything through this filter of, is it going to help my students connect with each other and with me? Is it going to help my students connect with music? And that meant that lots of things on the surface might look like they're collaborative ended up getting filtered out of what I chose to do. Because, for example, lots of these multi-track recordings that we've seen and these mosaic style videos, on the surface, they look like they're collaborative, but no students were working together with each other to create that video or that recording. They were all working by themselves in isolation. And I think one thing that every human being on the planet needs in this pandemic time is connection rather than isolation.
So you covered a lot of ground there, but you essentially had to reflect on your own teaching practice and change your teaching philosophy. What do you say to people who are struggling with that change and digging deeper, who are just trying to do things as much the way as they used to do them? Where can they focus their time and attention and delve deep like you have?
Well, I think the first thing to recognize is that this whole period is really hard for everyone. And discounting that or dismissing that for ourselves, I think as educators, is really dangerous. Like, we need to recognize that we are living in a time that is challenging, unprecedented. There is no roadmap for people that have done this before, apart from, if you're doing it right now in 2021 and people did it before you in 2020, that we need to be compassionate with ourselves, that everyone is going to respond to this in a different way, and everyone is going to have a different capacity for how much they feel they can adapt themselves. One of the things that I think often holds people back from trying new things, not just as educators, but in general, is obviously fear. And it's probably fear of failure is a big common one that we all have, me included. I think particularly for educators and teachers, fear of control, losing control can be a big one as well. And, as teachers, we're often working with a large group of students, and we have things that we would like to control. We would like to get to a certain outcome with the activity or with the music that we're working on, or, we would like our students to behave in a certain way because that means that the things that we're teaching will go more smoothly. And trying new things can make us be wary of losing control, because for lots of us, we're very practiced at how to run a rehearsal or how to manage student behavior, whatever it might be. And doing it in a completely different context is really scary, because we might have moments where things are less in control than we think or that we are used to. And the other thing that we can't control, I think, in this new environment is the outcome. And we've been so attached, I think, for all of us, to the outcome of playing a performance or a student doing a playing or a singing test or some kind of tangible end point. And that's been what we've put all of our focus and our energy towards is this single outcome. And so now in this current context where we can't have a normal rehearsal, we can't have everyone playing together at the same time in an easy, convenient way, especially with a very large group, that's threatening this idea of having a very discrete outcome that we can aim for. And so I think it's completely reasonable and understandable that people are afraid of moving into this territory of, well, what if I don't play a concert? Or what if I don't create a video or recording of my students? So I think for people that are feeling a bit resistant, to acknowledge that resistance is the first thing, and maybe have a think about why they're feeling that way. Because sometimes just, identifying and recognizing, I'm worried that there won't be an outcome in the same way that there was before, or I'm worried that my class might go out of control on a Zoom rehearsal, or I'm worried about giving students more responsibility and creativity because things might not go how I planned. Just acknowledging those things is a great starting point. And that mere acknowledgement might actually help you realize that some of those things, well, it might be fine if those things happen, or maybe they're not as threatening as they might appear when they're a bit of a hazy thing that you haven't really put much thought or attention to. And then I think once, for those people, if you're kind of aware of what might be feeling challenging to you, is taking some comfort in the thought that we are all in this together. Like everyone in the whole world, in a completely unprecedented way, is all in this together. Everyone is facing this same challenge in a different way. And if they're not facing it right now at the same moment that you are, that they were before, or they're going to. And part of all of us facing this challenge is we are going to make mistakes. And there are going to be things that don't go to plan or don't turn out how we want. I had lots of rehearsals during last year where I had these impeccable lesson plans all planned out to help my students take more responsibility for their learning and do independent group tasks together. And some of them were just a complete flop, and they did not engage students at all in the way that I thought. And they were a complete disaster. And it helped me come back to that beginner mindset that if you teach beginners, our beginner students have, of lots and lots of trial and error, which is part of how we learn. And we're only going to learn how to get better at online teaching and online learning if we try stuff. We're not going to get better if we don't allow ourselves to be in that position to fail. Failure is absolutely impeccable part of learning, and discomfort is a really essential part of learning. I was listening to a Brene Brown podcast recently, and she was talking about her college students that she teaches. And she says to them at the beginning of every semester, if you're comfortable, then you're probably not learning. And I think that that's something that we can all take into account as teachers who are hoping to constantly get better at what we do and serve our students better each and every day, that we need to tolerate a little bit of discomfort, or maybe a lot of discomfort at this challenging time, if we want to get better at serving our students in this online environment.
So be self-compassionate and lifelong learners, and be okay with failure. But how do you say that to somebody whose entire career has been based around the trophies, right? And the applause and the wonderful feedback from concert performances? Where do we find those opportunities for self-fulfillment in addition to self-compassion?
That's a great question. I think we need to think about redefine what success means for us and for our students. And I've been in there. I've been in that position of going to lots of competitions and struggling with the validation that does come from doing well in a competition, because that was something that I didn't want to be the main focus for my students. I've worked in a couple of different programs that are very high performing competitive programs, and the student focus was very much on performing well in competitions. And when I got to those places, I was really trying to reshape the culture to be about sharing a great performance with an audience. And that if you can share a great performance with an audience, then, and you do your absolute best at doing that to move people and transform people and connect with people through music, then, you know, you're probably going to do a good job on the concert ratings as well, on the performance ratings. But it being about serving people rather than getting a number or a rating. But I know what that feels like, to have that external validation and feel like I did a fantastic performance for the audience. Oh, but we only got XYZ score or XYZ placing. And me feeling disappointed about that, even though I didn't want to. So for those people that have had a lot of validation and adulation from, you know, competitions and performances, it's maybe now an opportunity to look at what else came from those experiences. Because probably what else came from those experiences was, you know, students realizing the value of working hard over a long period of time to achieve something, of setting a standard, whether that's an externally set standard, but obviously if you're going to be working towards that, you're going to have your own standards, of setting a high standard and helping students learn how to work towards a high standard, of creating something beautiful, something musically that's beautiful, and realizing the composer's intentions of the music. All of those things probably also happened in those moments of preparing for a competition or a big event or a festival. That those are things that we can still work towards and focus on within the context of online rehearsals. So when that external validation is stripped away, those are things that remain. And I think it's also an opportunity, if you've been very focused on that external validation, to think about how you might get a different type of external validation that is about sharing music with people, and the way that music can move and transform people's lives, from the small little everyday moments to much bigger, more profound moments. And I think for most of us, even if you've sort of come through a whole lifetime of, as a student, you were in one of these very competitive, high performing programs, and you've sort of tracked through that journey right now to being the director at one of these programs, that it wasn't just that kept you in music. Like, there's something about music that has spoken to you on a personal level. Maybe it was some kind of experience that you had, or something you felt that you've gotten from music in a way that you couldn't get from other things. And that's the thing that we can now come back to. And that's the thing that I think ultimately we are in the music education business is because we want to share that feeling, whatever it was that we had. We want to share that with other people, with our students, and with their families and with our audiences. So coming back to that, what got you here? What got you into this game in the first place? And how can you give that to someone else? Might be a new way of reframing that validation. And, instead of it being about, I got a 1 rating on a festival that probably no longer exists anyway right now, instead of it being about a number or a win or a place, that it's about someone came up to me after our online informants that maybe had no actual live playing in it, or someone sent me a message in the Zoom chat when we did a presentation to the parents about what we'd been working on, and the parents said, oh, I didn't know that before, and that really struck a chord with me, or that music that I heard or that you gave us information about really reminded me of my childhood and made me feel good. Or I've gone through a loss and this music really helped me in that period. Like, those are a different kind of win, and for me they're a more valuable kind of win than the winning on a competition stage.
That's so awesome. I love how you just go so deep into it. It really comes down to our why, doesn't it?
Yeah, and we all have that. I think it can be so easy for us in any context. I know we're living in such a kind of fraught, divided world right now. But I think even as a team, a community of educators, it's really easy for us to kind of get divided or put up walls, even with other people in the profession, and think, oh, well, they don't do it the way I do it, so like they don't get it, or what they're doing is not right. But I think fundamentally all of us have that why in common. It might not be the same why, but there'll be similarities. We all got into teaching music because we love the experience of music and we wanted to share that with others. And I think we can really unite and connect and come together on that why.
Oh, totally. So will you share with us some of the activities and things that you have adapted for your students that they do love, or maybe some of the things that they hated as well?
Sure, I can give you a whole range. So one activity that was probably the most popular that I did in online learning and I did this right from sort of 8th grade students who had a couple of years playing under their belts to a youth orchestra that I run that is kind of college level students and above. And this activity was pretty universally enjoyed. Was this idea of online score reading. And first of all, the students get to experience the whole score. If we think about what we do when we're in, say, a normal ensemble rehearsal, so much of our time is spent helping students become more aware of what's going on beyond their own part. So taking them from this sort of A4, that's our paper size, for you in the US would be a letter size experience, to having a room size experience of the music. And it's really easy for us conductors, I think, particularly if we're not actively playing, and probably most of us are not right now, that experience of being a player or singing is a little bit different, because if you're a choral musician, you're super lucky, you get the whole score in front of you. But for an instrumental musician, you just have that one line. And I liken it to this idea of when you get a puzzle, and lots of people have been doing puzzles in lockdown, being in an ensemble is like having your one piece of the puzzle, and you're expected to sit there in your seat and through the experience of rehearsal come to an understanding of that entire picture that is on the lid of the puzzle box, and understand how your one little piece fits into that picture. but you never get to see the actual picture. So sure, you listen to recordings, and I'm not sure about other teachers, but I have varied success in getting students to independently listen to recordings, aside from the ones that I might play to them in a rehearsal. And probably even lower likelihood of students going and looking at the conductor's score, even when I make that available for them to go and look at under their own steam. And so this activity was designed to help students have that big picture view, for them to be able to hear and see the entire work of the piece of music rather than just their one little line. And through that experience of basically seeing what the conductor sees, to have a much deeper and more nuanced understanding of both the piece as a whole and also of their role within the music. And so in this activity, every student gets a copy, like a digital copy of the score. And obviously the first thing to do if they haven't seen a score before is to get them to ask a lot of questions about what they see, because getting them to ask the questions rather than us telling them is obviously going to really improve the quality of their learning. And also we uncover fantastic things that we would never have thought of. Like was working with this orchestra and we were doing this activity, and there was a student in the orchestra who was a college composition student, and he asked, why are some of the French horns in one key and some of the French horns in another key? And so one of the French horn players in the orchestra got to give this explanation of the history of the French horn and why there are different transpositions. And there were other people in the orchestra who didn't know what transposition was at all. As a string player, they didn't know that the clarinets were reading in a completely different key signature to them. So even just that introductory process of, here are all the instruments, and there were questions like, well, why are they in this order? Why does it go woodwind, brass, percussion, strings? And they came up with all these self-directed, curious questions that they went and answered for themselves when the answer, wasn't readily apparent from other students in the group, and I wasn't going to give it to them either. And they asked questions as well that I didn't know the answer to. So all of us learned just in that orientation to the score. And then the rest of the process involves, once they understand, the layout of the score and who is where, that students get put into little groups that each tackle one section of the piece. And you can work out with yourself or with your students what you want them to know about the piece. So, do you want them to be focusing on the expressive side of the music? Like, what is the mood of the music at this point? Or if there was a story, what would be going on in the story at this point in the music? Or you might want to be more analytical or theoretical. Okay, who's got the melody? Or what key do you think it's in? Who's got the accompaniment? What is the accompaniment doing? What are the dynamics? All those basic, so there's those sort of identification tasks, which are sort of, if we think about Bloom's taxonomy, are sort of on that lower level. And then you can take them right up to questions about more evaluation and creativity and abstract thinking about the expressive side of the music. And so each student team goes off on their own, so in a breakout room or using whatever video conferencing technology you're using, off into a group, and they have to fill out this chart with their little section of the music in a, I use Google Docs, so in a collaborative spreadsheet. And so what you see happen over the period of, say, 10 minutes is you suddenly see this spreadsheet populate with the students' analysis of the entire piece. So within 10 minutes, you can have, if you split up your groups across one piece of music, they might be working on, say, 16 bars, 16 measures at a time, that over 10 minutes, they have created this explanation of the whole piece. And then they can go and look at another groups who have looked at measure, 37 to 56 and say, I didn't realize that the clarinets have the melody there. Oh, but so does so does the French horn. That's interesting. And then, the bassoon player realizes, oh, I didn't know that the Barry sax has the same line as me there. And so they work on one little segment themselves, but then they get to see the product of the entire class's work on this one piece, and they can follow through. Oh, well, this is what happens in the story of the piece of music or the mood of the music from beginning to end. Or this is what happens. This is how the melody travels throughout the ensemble across the duration of an entire piece. And you come up with this amazing map, like a chart of the piece that can be used, if they're working on practicing their own individual parts, if you're still in your online thing, or if you're doing a hybrid rehearsal and you're actually there with the students, they can have that in their music folder, or, you can project it on the whiteboard so that they can know, oh, okay, we're at bar 36 and this is the spot where the clarinets and the French horn have the melody. Oh, and Lisa in alto saxophone, what are you doing at this point? Oh, yep, I'm doing the offbeat accompaniment at this point. Fantastic. Okay, and Richard in the trombone, what's going on in the character of the music? Oh, yep, we wrote that it's really defiant sounding. So it can just serve as such a fantastic resource for the ongoing learning of a piece of music. And all the groups that I've done this with have said that they want to do this with every piece that they work on when we go back in person. So they've actually requested to have an online session before the first rehearsal where they learn about the piece in this way before they even touch their instruments.
That is so awesome. And you're still teaching them music. You're still creating meaning for them. It's still super relevant. So if that's the case, this is going to be a really weird question, but what is the importance of having ensembles at all? Is it just tradition, or what do you think the future should really look like?
I'm reading a really interesting book at the moment called The Body Keeps the Score by an American Dutch author called Bessel van der Kolk. And it's about trauma and the way that the mind and the body interact through trauma. And one of the things that he has been talking about is the absolutely necessary human desire for connection and attunement. So being able to get in sync with other people. And he actually talks about ensemble music making and choral singing as being a perfect outlet for this experience of being in sync and attuned with other people. And again, I think anyone listening to this podcast knows that feeling of being together in a room with other people, playing or singing together, there's nothing like it. And again, that's coming back to that why. We've had that amazing experience and we want others to have that amazing experience as well. And, that feeling, that can't exactly be replicated in online learning. And that's just a fact, unless you happen to have some fabulous software where you can get everyone playing in sync at the same time, which I know that does exist for some smaller numbers and smaller groups. But if you're working with a big group, that feeling is not exactly replicable yet. And I think that's what we're all going to love when we do get back to in-person music making. I got together 3 other French horn players just before Christmas, and we got together and played some Christmas carol horn quartets. And none of us had played with other people apart from students in online lessons or in maybe in person, a couple of lessons, but individuals. And we nearly cried when the first note happened and we were all playing together. So I think that's what it's for, that visceral indescribable feeling of doing that with other people, and the feeling of the sound. That's what it's for when we get back to it.
I completely agree. And if I could wave my magic wand and remake all of our educational systems, the only thing we would do in person are the performing arts. And everything else could be entirely self-paced and entirely online and one-to-one teaching. And we could really give everybody the opportunity to play and sing and perform and experience music together, because it is so incredibly tangible. And the fact that I, as an online learning sort of expert and advocate, and you, who's very similar on the other side of the world, can say that and admit it, and we're both horn players, which means we're super smart. That really does say something about it. So thank you so much for spending this time with me and sharing your wonderful, wonderful insights. Is there anything else that you want to say to our listeners to help encourage them in this challenging time? I mean, you're in the future for us. So any final thoughts?
Well, you mentioned just before the idea of self-paced for other subject areas, and that's something that has really got me thinking during this period of online learning. Is one thing that online learning was fantastic for was it really did allow for a lot more individualized learning and self-paced learning, depending on kind of how you design your activities. And so I had students that, have developmental challenges or, certain diagnoses that are kind of challenging the way that they learn. And there were certain things about online that were actually a lot better for them. And there were things about online that, for many of my students, improved the way that they were able to be active participants in the class. Students that would just be sitting in the back desk of the clarinets, and it would be so difficult to get them to speak up in a rehearsal, even if I'd, individually address them with a question, that online learning became this great democratizer of our ensembles, that there were no more desks anymore, there are no more chairs anymore. Everyone is showing up on that same, video conferencing screen. If you're, say, on Zoom, for example, that people who maybe didn't have a voice before were able to have a voice in a different way, or to able to feel more comfortable about speaking up and having a voice. And those are just a couple of the positive things that have come out of online learning for me. And there are many that now I'm thinking about, how am I going to carry those positive things forward back into the in-person context. My youth orchestra that I mentioned earlier has basically completely transformed as a group of people throughout online learning. And we have people that had never said a single word in years of sitting in the orchestra who, one person I'm thinking of has English as a second language and had been very reticent and timid to speak up, who spoke up multiple times. And now that's just part of what they do. Or a timpanist who said, oh, online rehearsals have been so great because now I can see people's faces. And she said, the back of everyone's head is not very identifiable. And when I'm on Zoom, I can see everyone's face and I can see their name written underneath their face on a Zoom screen. And now I actually know who people are. And things like that have really given me huge food for thought in how we run our in-person rehearsals and what we can actually learn. So my challenge to everyone, wherever you are in your online journey, whether that's it's happening right now for you or it's in the past, is to think about what have you learned and what has actually been better as a result of this online experience that can improve and challenge and transform what we do in the future when we do get back to that joyous experience of making music in person.
Outstanding. Well, Ingrid, thank you so much for being my guest on this episode. And it's just been such a pleasure. So I encourage everyone to, of course, check out all of the wonderful online resources that you have at conductingartistry.com. Do you do any personal coaching or anything like that? And you should give a plug for your podcast too.
Yes, I do personal coaching, whether that's about your teaching or about your conducting, everything from running rehearsals to, how we wave the stick better and more expressively. I do a lot of online workshops as well, so people can find me there. And I've got a ebook that I released last year, which is 110 innovative rehearsal activities for online and hybrid rehearsals. So if you're looking for something interesting to do with your students, even a short thing or something that's going to go over a whole unit of learning, there's plenty there to find.
Awesome. And we will have the links to all of those things in the show notes as well. So thank you again. I can't begin to guess which parts of this conversation resonated with you the most, but I can tell you that for me, it all comes down to the core beliefs we have as music educators. So much of the last few decades, we have focused solely on ensemble performance and neglected so much of what music education holistically can and should be for our students in the process. We've measured ourselves by concert performances and adjudicator scores instead of what we should be focused on, which is creating passionate, lifelong musicians. Whether you're teaching in person, entirely online, or some version of hybrid, I hope that you keep this in mind. What are we doing to create passionate, lifelong musicians? Again, I thank you for sharing this time with me. If ever there is a topic you'd like us to cover or a guest you'd like to hear me interview, don't hesitate to let me know. You can contact me at any time at musicedmentor.com. Remember, you'll want to check out the show notes for this episode for all the goodies from Ingrid. It's at smartmusic.com/blog. She's got free books and courses full of student engagement ideas and activities for you. That's smartmusic.com/blog. Simply type podcast into the search bar. As always, my friends, remember to keep teaching on.